It's another Football Friday on News OK Live. Headline today by Kyle Fredrickson. Kyle, I'm starting with you. Bedlam battle of the third stringers. Who ever saw this quarterback matchup when the season started? Cody Thomas, who conceivably would have been third string if the Sooners couldn't have got Baker Mayfield eligible, against Mason Rudolph, who Mike Gundy would have loved to have been able to redshirt, did not pull the red shirt off before Baylor. Here's my question to you, Kyle. What's a bigger upset? If Mason Rudolph would go down to Norman on Saturday and pull a Josh Fields circa 2001, or if Cody Thomas ended up being the starter when the season started next year for the Sooners?
That's a good question, and two very unlikely things, I think, when we look at both of these scenarios on their face. Obviously, Mason Rudolph comes out against Baylor. It showcases what kind of has made OSU fans think this guy might be the future. You know, he's got that Brandon Weeden frame, 220, 6'4", big arm, showed a lot of poise in the rain, the ability to avoid the rush. And so those are all good things, and those are all good signs coming into Bedlam. If Rudolph is going to be the guy, and it sure would seem that's the case, that he would give them maybe a little bit of a spark to kind of bring up some of that Josh Fields magic that you had mentioned. But obviously the problem in that is that it's going to take much more than Mason Rudolph to beat this OU team. It's not all on him. And so for that reason and that alone, and it's splitting things by a hair a little bit, I'd probably give the nod to Cody Thomas being the starter. It would just take such an incredible effort from an OSU team to win this Bedlam game. They haven't shown anything to this point that you can really point to say, well, this is why they have a good shot. Other than Rudolph, the defense has been shaky early in games and has stiffened up, but the Cowboys keep getting big numbers put up against them. So you go back to the Cody Thomas situation, and Ryan and Jenny and Barry will be able to talk about this with more clarity than me. But it would just seem to me that even though Cody Thomas hasn't really had to showcase his arm these past couple games, especially against Kansas, he's got this game and a bowl game, possibly if Trevor Knight isn't able to come back, to showcase his skill set and to continue to develop and kind of reinvigorate that conversation going spring as who the guy's going to be at OU. And I'm sure that Ryan will probably say that Baker Mayfield is going to be the front runner heading into the season, and he probably should be. But at least in this scenario, you get Cody Thomas, at least one more game to showcase what he has, and I think that alone gives him the edge in comparing these scenarios, whether or not Mason Rudolph and the Cowboys could get the upset.
OU beat writer Ryan Aber joining us. Ryan, both of these are unlikely. That's why I called them upsets. However, you got to pick one. There's not a third alternative. What you got?
Yeah, I'd go with Cody Thomas as well. I think having this experience of these three games, possibly a fourth in the bowl game, gives him an excellent shot. Lets him get some of those freshman jitters and those errors that he's going to make when he starts out of the way, and I think he's doing that right now. He's got a fantastic arm. He hasn't had to show it a lot, hasn't shown it a lot. Certainly needs to get more accurate. But I think Cody Thomas has a really good shot at this quarterback battle going into the spring.
Jenny Carlson, of course, John Helsley wrote about Mason Rudolph this week in the paper and talked about the similarities, some very slim similarities between the 2001 Josh Fields and Mason Rudolph. One of them that's totally different is we knew a lot more about Josh Fields personally, his character, his makeup in 2001 than we do about Mason Rudolph. Which one of these two do you have? Which upset would you take?
I think it's probably the bigger upset would be OSU winning, pulling a Josh Fields. You're right, we did know more about Fields, but that was largely because he was a Stillwater product. Went to Stillwater High School, was a two-sport standout there, football and baseball. So we covered him for, several years. But he hadn't played very much. He did not start the week before at Baylor, came off the bench, rallied OSU to a win at Baylor in a, not great season. It was kind of a spark. But even at that, I don't think anybody thought that OSU was going to go to OU and win. That was obviously, I don't know if it's now stands as the best game in this series, but Clearly one of the better upsets out there. So, yeah, while we don't know much about Rudolph in the same way we didn't know too much about Fields as an OSU quarterback, I think we can safely say he's shown some good signs, shown some positive returns, and very limited action so far. But I just think the degree of difficulty, it goes beyond Mason Rudolph. That to me is the biggest thing. I think there are areas of weakness that OSU could expose, but how does OSU's offensive line and fullbacks and tight ends, how do they handle what's sure to be an OU onslaught? I mean, I have to think that they're going to pressure and blitz as much as they possibly can to try to get to Rudolph, keep the ball out of the hands of the OSU wide receivers, which is the Cowboys' strength. So I just think that that to me, if the only question was Rudolph, if the other 10 around him were really solid and had been really good, you could maybe see that upset a lot more likely. But I just still have such huge questions about that OSU front. I just don't think you can ignore that when talking about this equation.
Barry, the question was phrased as this: which would be a bigger upset? A Josh Fields performance and result for Mason Rudolph, or Cody Thomas winning the job for the Sooners next spring? Which one are you taking?
I think I'd almost take Mason Rudolph, but I'm not crazy about either one. Here's the deal: I'm anxious to see Cody Thomas throw the ball in halfway decent weather, because when you talk about his passing, they say, well, it was windy in Lubbock and it was rainy against Kansas, which maybe it was, but he's got to be way better than that at throwing the ball, or he's not in the debate.
Yeah.
Bob Stoops doesn't have a lot of patience with quarterbacks that can't complete passes. So I think it'd be probably a bigger deal if Mason Rudolph won. However, I will say this: the biggest upset of all will be if Cody Thomas wins the job next year, throwing like he's throwing today.
Hey, by the way, the issues of the bad weather, as bad as it was in that Kansas game, and Ryan and I saw it firsthand, just how heavy that rain was. Let's not forget, rain was pretty bad in Waco later that night, and Mason Rudolph slung it around pretty good. So, and obviously they didn't throw it much against Kansas, didn't need to with P. Ryan and the line blocking like they did. But to say it was all a product of weather, or major part was weather, I mean, I don't think you could ignore the fact that in very similar conditions later that day, Mason Rudolph, in his first career start on the road, looked a lot more effective throwing the ball than we saw Cody Thomas throw it on earlier in that day.
Barry,
he played okay.
Let's not talk about it.
Okay, Jenny, let's stay with you. The air has gone out of Bedlam a little bit, at least comparably to the last 2 years, in which we had thrillers in Stillwater and thrillers in Norman. Last year in Stillwater, we had an earthquake during a Ben Grogan field goal attempt that somebody barely noticed. You guys barely noticed. I noticed it. Ben Grogan did not notice it. So
Ryan Neighbor noticed it.
Yes, Ryan Neighbor was sitting down there by me. So anyway, we sort of took note of that. But this year, the stakes of Bedlam aren't what they have been. The opportunity for excitement doesn't appear to be there. We've seen ticket prices go down, $49 right now on Oklahoma tickets, or OklahomaTickets.com, $60 for two on Craigslist. Jenny, we know the whys, but what's the impact of the soft ticket market and the lack of excitement on these two programs?
Well, I mean, I think that sort of long-term remains to be seen. It sounds from what we're sort of hearing out of Stillwater that the season ticket sales are off at OSU. About 10% is a number I've heard thrown around. So obviously OSU had been riding really high with its ticket sales, had been going up and up and up since the renovations to the stadium up there. But now it looks like they're taking a dip. And obviously that has to be, related to what's going on the field. But I think, Mike Gundy and some of the off the field concerns that have been raised about him and his, feuding with Boone Pickens, some other things that I don't think fans are real fired up about. So, that's a concern. And then I think if you're at OU, I think there at least has to be some measure of concern as they get ready to launch, this huge effort to expand the stadium. As we've written and talked about before, not going to expand much in the way of seating necessarily. So it's not like they have to go out and, try to fill a bunch of season ticket seats that they don't have people for, but they're trying to raise this money. And so they're going to be asking a lot of people for, big checks. And to me, that's part of this is, just that lack of buzz and excitement about where the program's heading. They maybe get their big boosters to give, but it's maybe that mid-range of person that, might give $5,000 or $10,000, money that, they desperately need to get that project done, but maybe those folks aren't as motivated. I think that's going to be an interesting quandary for Joe Castiglione and his staff as they go out and try to make sure that they've got the funds to do this expansion.
Ryan Aber, it's the last home game of the season. It's Bedlam. The weather, which is not so good in Oklahoma City today, looks like it'll be better tomorrow, or at least an early forecast I saw did. Do you expect it to be a normal OU crowd, or do you think there might be some empty seats?
No, I think it's going to be a pretty good crowd. I think just because of the fact that they've had so many 11 o'clock games in a row. I mean, this is the first non-11 o'clock game since Tennessee came to Norman a long time ago, it seems like now. So I think people are going to be fired up just because it's Bedlam. I've been talking to some fans on both sides earlier today, and both groups that I've talked to seem like they're pretty fired up about it, although they acknowledge that this is probably the least impactful Bedlam since 2005, but it is still Bedlam. People will be fired up for it.
Barry, how would you characterize the mood of OU fans right now?
Oh, I think they're somewhat re-energized, thanks to our good friend Samaje Perine, if, in fact, you allow me to talk about personnel. But I think Perine sort of got everybody fired up to some degree. The one thing this OU season has lacked, if you listen to me, I hold the OU defense more accountable than the OU offense for the troubles this year.
Yep.
However, the one thing OU's offense has lacked this season is an identity. You really don't know what they're good at. You don't know really what you can count on. All of a sudden, I think we know. This is a power running team with a really good offensive line and a emerging start tailback in Samaje Perine, and I think most people recognize that and are fired up to see what Perine can do against Oklahoma State. Can he keep up those 200 or 300 yard rushing games? I mean, it's silly to sit here and question whether can Perine can he run for 300 yards on OSU until that Kansas game. In the history of OU football, no one had ever run for 300 yards in a game, and now we want Perine to do it every week. But I think that just shows you sort of how people are energized. I think they were looking for something to latch onto, and I think they found it.
Kyle, we've heard from a lot of OSU fans this week. A lot of our readers say we've been too negative on OSU. But how would you characterize the mood of the OSU fan going into Bedlam?
I think it's kind of split into three different groups, and as of right now, so much of the fan bases, their emotions and everything has just been tied into with this weird Mike Gundy drama that we've had. And like you said, I've gotten plenty of emails from angry fans just for simply reporting the Gundy to Michigan odds. I mean, people are very sensitive about Mike Gundy. He's been here for 10 years, and a lot of people, no matter how well the team's doing right now, they're always going to be in that Gundy camp. So you have those fans who are very pro-Gundy. They want him here for the long haul. They still see him as that guy who took over the program and said it was his New York Yankees job. And then you've got a group of people who are totally off the Gundy bandwagon. They want him gone. They want something new in. That they're tired of his antics, and understandably so with how kind of strange that past press conference was. And then I think you've just got a lot of people who are just a little bit confused about the state of the program right now. Is what we've been seeing in these press conferences and are these results on the field, is this the start of a long-term trend? Or, like Mike Gundy says, is this a rebuilding year where the team can simply kind of work these young guys in and continue to develop, and then in a year from now, everyone will look back on this season and say, wow, the OSU really climbed out of a hole. What a great job by this staff. So a lot to be seen. I think it's a big mixture across the board for how people are feeling. But I think the overall themes right now is Mason Rudolph is the guy of the future. There's a lot of excitement there. But that doesn't mean that Bedlam is going to be easy by any means. And this fan base, is used to seeing losses now, with 5 in a row.
Okay, Barry, and that segues to our next question, which is there's talk about mood, but then there's math. Mike Gundy's OU problem has lost 8 of 9, would make 9 of 10 with a loss Saturday in Norman. On the DEFCON scale, we're going back to the War Games days. 1 to 5, with 1 being the highest DEFCON. That means white boxes piled up in the hallway outside Mike Gundy's office. Where do you set the DEFCON right now for OU for Gundy's OU problem?
I think Gundy's OU problem has slipped in importance. It now ranks behind Mike Gundy's personality problem. There's going to be some people, even if he beats OU, there's going to be some people that says, if you don't change your personality, we still can't stand to have you as the coach. So what's going on? What's eating Gilbert Grape? What's eating Gilbert Gundy is the question. And people want to know what's wrong with Mike Gundy. He's got his Yankee job. He's got his dream job. He had a great team last year, won the Big 12 in 2011. He ought to be riding high. Why is he so dang unhappy? I think that's a bigger question than why can't you beat OU. I think the DEFCON scale on Bedlam has dropped into the 3 or 4 range for Gundy, but it's not alleviated pressure. Something has moved into its place.
Ryan Aber, if we thought about this in bigger terms, we took it to different schools where coaches had difficulty beating a rival. It's cost lots of coaches their jobs. Mac Brown's OU problem. At one point, Bob Stoops had an OSU problem back in the days of Rashawn Woods. So can you imagine what it would be like if Bob Stoops had lost 8 out of 9 to Texas or had lost 8 out of 9 to OSU? What would things be like in Norman?
Well, I think we'd probably have a different coach other than Bob Stoops. Now, I think Mike Gundy is in a little bit different position because he's an alum. He's built up so much goodwill, but that goodwill is fading fast, it seems like, in Stillwater right now. And I think, like Barry, I think the personality problem has become a bigger issue right now. But if he loses this game on Saturday, all of that stuff just compounds, and you could see it rising through the level of, like you said, white boxes in the office getting ready to pack up and move on.
Jenny,
you guys may not, a lot of people don't remember this because you're too young, but we've seen this play out in Norman. Gary Gibbs lost his job because over 6 years he went 2-15-1 against the 3 schools that he was graded against. It was not Oklahoma State. Back in those days, the Cowboys weren't competitive, but 89 through 94, Gibbs went 2-15-1 against Texas, Nebraska, and Colorado. And he was ushered out the door, even though he had built up the program, done a solid job of cleaning up a mess, going through probation, but he didn't beat those rivals. And far too often it came in either in some sort of disappointing, dramatic way or blowout. He lost his job.
Jenny, when we talk about this, we're really talking about a goodwill reservoir that Gundy's had to sort of cushion the disappointment of losing to OU. We also talk about reality. OSU's record lifetime is not very good against OU. Which of those two things is sort of cushion things more? The reality that, hey, this has been tough on every OSU coach, or the goodwill that Gundy apparently still has some amount of?
Probably more the former than the latter, because I do think that it is a problem amongst fans, and it was obviously a problem in Boone Pickens' mind. He said that before this dud of a season even started. He talked about, even though he was being asked questions before that Florida State game about all of the good that Mike Gundy had done in building the program, he came back to, but you got to beat OU. You got to beat OU. Not beating OU enough. And so he's clearly got a problem with it. Now, maybe not as much of a problem as Barry said. Maybe the level of importance on the checklist he has a problem with is not as high as it was at the beginning of the year. But clearly that's an issue for him. And I think it is for a lot of other fans too, from a couple standpoints. One that I'm actually writing about, the OU problem Gundy has. for our pregame section on Saturday. And, there are a good number of OSU fans out there who, as much as anything, are angry that Gundy doesn't acknowledge that this is a big deal, that Bedlam is a big deal. They got to walk around and work and live and play and go to church and do all those sorts of things with Sooner fans. And the idea that they've had to, stomach all these Bedlam losses in this last decade, they know it's a big deal. And so when Gundy says it's just like any other week, that gets under their skin a lot. So Gundy could do some things, I think, to soften some of these losses a little bit. But he sort of continues to have that rhetoric of it's just another week. It's not as big a deal as you might think. So I think it has to be that people just look at this as a historically lopsided series, because OSU's caught a bunch of other people in terms of records. If you look at how they've done against this budding Baylor program or against Texas in recent years, they've had great success long term against some of those teams they needed to catch and get by in the Big 12. But OU, they just cannot get over any sort of hump against the Sooners.
Kyle, where does Gundy's OU problem rank on the list of his problems?
I don't know. I know it's a little bit downplayed because of what we've seen in the media with Mike Gundy's demeanor and his personality, like Barry had said. But can you imagine what an OU victory at the end of this year would not only mean for Gundy and for his personality and for how he views this season, but for the whole fan base, for Boone Pickens? I think that a win would really mean a whole lot to this team right now. And I think that is an indicator of how big of a problem it's been. In a down year where OSU has had to play 3 different quarterbacks and they can't establish the run game, and there's all this off-the-field soap opera stuff going on, finishing the year with that Bedlam win, getting into a bowl game, it would almost completely transform, I think, how people look at this season. And I think that's an indicator of just how much of a problem it is. And if it's something that's solved this year, it could lead to a lot more stability, I think, in the Gundy camp and for everyone who's really, has focused on this program with a negative eye just because of how things played out. So I think it's a big deal.
We're staying on the coaching train here. Ryan Aber, bringing you in to start this conversation. We've got coordinators all over the place in Bedlam, 4 of them. Rank the Bedlam coordinators based on the quality of job they've done this year from best to worst.
Oh, geez. Could you give me a little bit easier question here? I think I'd probably have to start with Josh Heupel. I know he gets a lot of grief from OU fans because of some of the things he does, not running the quarterback against Texas last year, maybe waiting too long to give Samaje Perine the ball. Outside of a couple of head-scratching moves, I think Josh Heupel has had a pretty good year play calling-wise. After that, they're all pretty well grouped together. I'd probably say, Glenn Spencer second, maybe Yurcich third, Mike Stoops fourth. I think their inability to seemingly make any adjustments in that Baylor game after the Bears just came out and doing the exact same thing all the way down the field left a lot of people scratching their heads about Mike Stoops.
Barry, what do you think of Ryan's rankings?
I'd put Glenn Spencer first. I thought the OSU defense actually held up pretty good with a lot of adversity, an offense that literally has not moved the ball, brand new in the back end. I think they've done a pretty good job. I agree Heupel deserves more credit, way more credit than he gets. I'd rank Spencer, Heupel 1, 2. I would not be crazy about picking between Mike Stoops and Mike Yurcich. I think both have had very poor years. I'd probably put Yurcich ahead, though, because the injury factor has really hit Yurcich pretty hard. He lost his quarterback and got the offensive line wiped out. Mike Stoops had some DB issues health-wise, but it's mostly been schematics and structurally. Bobby Hebert mentioned Baylor. That was an abomination of a defensive performance. So I'd probably go Spencer, Heupel, Yurcich, Stoops.
Jenny, rank them, and consider we're now talking about Bob Stoops' brother getting the worst grade in this class.
Yeah, and that's not going to cost him his job at all. I mean, I think Barry, I go with Barry because I do think that while OSU's defense has given up a lot of points. A lot of that can't really be blamed on the job that Glenn Spencer has done. I mean, look at all the question marks out there before the season and how they've really been the stabilizer. If there's been something to stabilize the Cowboys, it's been that. But no, I mean, Mike Stoops, this defense it's not been as good as he advertised before the year, as a lot of us thought it would be. Clearly a lot of talent, but still some big-time deficiencies in this defense, notably the secondary or safeties and DBs. To me, that's where, if OSU is going to score an upset tomorrow, to me, that's where it comes, is if Mason Rudolph's given enough time by his blockers, and if he spins it well and they can get into that secondary, that's OSU's strength, wide receivers, against OU's biggest weakness, their secondary. I think that's where OSU could potentially score an upset, but I mean, I don't know if OSU can give Rudolph enough time. But clearly, this defense has been a problem in those big games. I mean, if you look at the losses, that's where they've really had their problems. And I don't think you can say that Mike Stoops has done a great job, and probably the worst job of the coordinators that we're talking about.
Kyle, for the sake of time, I'm going to let you put your rankings on the blog and get to this last question, guys. Baylor or TCU? This is a debate that's raged around the country, in our offices. Here's the question. If Baylor beats Kansas State on Saturday, which of these two Big 12 teams should be in the college football playoff? Ryan Aber, I'll let you go first. Unmute you, Ryan.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I think TCU deserves to be in. I've argued this for the last few weeks with my buddy Jason Kersey, and he sees it the other way. He thinks that Baylor should be in. And I know head-to-head matters, and it should. But here's the deal. We're not comparing just Baylor and TCU. We're comparing a group of schools for those 4 playoff spots, Ohio State included. I can completely see, and I believe that if you compare Ohio State and Baylor head-to-head, you can come out with Ohio State ahead. You compare TCU and Ohio State head-to-head, you come out with TCU ahead. I think TCU deserves to be in. They played a tougher schedule. They've done more with it. I think they should get in.
Kyle, the 2008 Big 12 dilemma, the three-way tie. That's not really a three-way tie, but that's how Ryan Aber sees it. How do you see it?
I actually agree with Ryan. I don't think it's the committee's job to decide a de facto Big 12 champion, and obviously head-to-head matters, wins matter. But if head-to-head and wins were the things that mattered most, Florida State would still be number one. And I don't hear that. I mean, there is a contingent of people, I think, who still think they should be there because they've won every single game this year, but just winning clearly isn't enough. And I think that's the point of this whole playoff, is to pick the 4 best teams based on every factor you can think of, head-to-head obviously being one, but clearly in this situation where you've got a lot of very good teams where you're splitting hairs, you've got to take in consideration non-conference schedules, how those wins and losses were done. And I think at the end of the day, TCU is the better team. But I will say, I really do think that Georgia Tech is going to beat Florida State on Saturday, and both those teams are going to get in, and then we'll go ahead and settle it that way.
How about it? I got that pick too, Kyle, by the way. Hey, Jenny. Every Saturday matters. The most important, impactful regular season in all of sports, except that one Saturday in Waco, way back when. That one doesn't matter. Who'd you pick?
I'm going to go against the grain to this point and say Baylor. I mean, what Baylor had in their non-conference is laughable. But let's be honest, TCU, when they scheduled their non-conference, I don't think anybody expected Minnesota to become a pretty good non-conference foe. I mean, do you mark against them for that? No, but I mean, I just think that head-to-head, you have to look at it. Now, I'm going to say not only is Florida State losing, but Ohio State's losing. I think both these teams could get in. I think the committee could go with both. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think they could, and maybe that's the debate we need to be talking about. One or two.
I picked both those things to happen, and I think both of them will get in if those two things go on.
That'd be awesome.
Okay, Barry Trammell, you get the last word, but let the record show. Minnesota, we're not talking about the purple people eaters. Alan Page, Carl Eller, not Adrian Peterson. It's the Minnesota Gophers.
The Golden Gophers are having a much better season than the Minnesota Vikings.
Hello?
What's your question? I'm here. What's the question? I heard a statement.
The question is if Baylor beats Kansas State on Saturday, who gets in? Which Big 12 team deserves to be in the college football playoff, Baylor or TCU? There you go.
All right, here you go. Who would be the #1 team in America if they had scheduled non-conference like Baylor this year? Who would be #1? That's your question for the day. Would you like me to tell you?
I would. Yes, I actually would.
The Buckeyes of Ohio State University. That's who. So, Minnesota is way better than Virginia Tech. But you know what happens when you play people that actually wear shoulder pads in their games? They can beat you. Kansas State right now has 2 additional quality wins. TCU has 2 additional quality wins over Baylor. After Saturday, if the favorites win, they will have 1 more over. Is that enough? Is 1 enough to make up for the discrepancy of head-to-head? I don't know. I hope not, personally, because I want Baylor to suffer for playing such a rum-dum schedule. The greatest thing in the history of college football would be if Baylor gets left out this year because of its schedule. Let me promise you, everybody in America is going to sober up. It's going to be a great thing. And think back to those salad days of September when you couldn't find a decent game to watch because everybody is playing Western Kentucky or Southern Utah. That's going to change if we leave Baylor out.
Barry,
hold on. Barry, did you just answer the question or not?
I think he did, sort of.
I'm not sure he did.
I don't know what's going to happen. I know what I hope happens.
Here's the deal, Barry. Oh, if it were only true. I remember back in the days growing up when I wished and hoped for a presidential election to be decided by the Electoral College. So we would then see how ridiculous it was and throw it out. Didn't happen. One was decided by the Electoral College, and we still got it. So there you go.
You are talking about irrational people when you get to politics. We're rational in sports. We can figure things out.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. I figured out it's time to go. That's all for this edition of Football Friday, but you can stay with the best coverage team every day on News OK and every morning in the Oklahoman.